Okay, I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am reading in a chronological order according to events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a little bit as I go along. I am currently continuing in Exodus. This will be chapter 21. Before I start reading, though, I do want to show you this again. I brought this one back because in the Bible, as published by the church, in the footnotes, there are selected portions of the Joseph Smith translation that I do read when they appear. However, this complete translation has every Joseph Smith translation, every correction, every restoration that Joseph Smith did is here. And now, for those who don't know, the Joseph Smith translation is an inspired correction or translation of the Bible done by Joseph Smith to restore portions that had been lost over the years. Chapter 21 has a couple of these restoration passages, a couple of these in it. So I wanted to bring this because the ones that here are not found in the footnotes, and I think they are important to note. So let us read here, chapter 21. The Lord reveals his laws pertaining to servants, plural marriage, the death penalty for diverse offenses, the giving of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, the regulations governing damage done by oxen. This isn't too long of a chapter, I don't think. It's a little long, so it might be 2 videos on this one. We'll see. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. If the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the door post. And his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So, let us talk about this just a little bit. In the modern day, of course, slavery is viewed only one way. With the slave trade of the 1700s and, I think, starting before, but the Atlantic slave trade at its height and slavery in the United States and all those things, these things were horrible things. Don't get me wrong, I have no approval of anything that happened in the Atlantic slave trade. But here, God is talking about slavery. And he is putting not only his seal of approval on it, but he's saying this is how you do it right. Now, people in the modern day don't like to hear this. They don't like to think that God could have any kind of approval for slavery, but he does, when done right. And what is going on? This is a Hebrew, and no, he doesn't say an Israelite servant. He says a Hebrew servant. Because remember, Abraham was not an Israelite, because he was before Israel, but he was a Hebrew. The Hebrews are those who are descended from Eber. Now, does this mean all those descended from Eber, or maybe just those descended from Abraham? Because I think this is including the, I think it is more than just Abraham. Because remember, the Moabites and the Ammonites are descended from Lot, Abraham's nephew, but they would also be Hebrews. And then the Midianites and the Ishmaelites and all the other descendants of Abraham, and the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, these are all Hebrews. And so this is not just talking about the Israelites. I think it is important to note that this says Hebrew, and at least at this time, the word Hebrew would have included many nations. So you can buy a Hebrew and he will serve for 6 years. You can't keep him for more than 6 years. If he wants to leave, at the end of 6 years, he goes. This is what we call a kind of a Sabbath of slavery. This is at least what I would term. You have 6 days of labor, 6 years of labor, and in the 7th year, he has rest. He gets to choose. Now you will note, if he is married when you buy the slave, if he already has a wife, then his wife and his children go out with him. He leaves your service in the same condition that he came into your service. Which also means that if he was a slave and he married another slave of his master, then that marriage does not give him the right to take his wife and children with him, because she is still the slave of his master. So he still has to leave on his own. Now, if he married but didn't marry one of his master's slaves, then she would go with him because she wouldn't be one of his master's slaves. But also note that they had the option that they could choose to remain slaves. And in such case, they would go to the judges and it says, bring him to the door or under the doorpost. I think this is talking about the temple, the tabernacle. But it doesn't really clarify that. But it says, bring him to the judges so that he tells the judges. The judges were the civil authority until the kings came. And even after the kings, you had local judges that would have been a civil authority under the king. So they're the ones that you have to file this properly. You have to go and file that you are remaining a slave. And then you have your ear, get an earring, an awl is just like a spike that they stick in your ear that marks you as a slave for life. But you can't be a slave for life unless you choose to be. But remember, you are still a slave. This is not just indentured servitude. This is slavery. The person owns the other person. But there was a limit of 6 years unless the slave chose to remain, at which point you only got one choice, one chance. If you choose to remain, you are now a slave for life. You never get another chance to be free. You are saying, right now, I'm giving up my liberty to remain a slave because I like my master, I like my wife, my kids, I like my situation, I don't want to leave it. That's fine. But you get the one choice. If you say, I'm going to stay, now you're a slave for life. Let us read a little bit more before we end the video. Here we go. Verse 7. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. Now, I'm going to pause here because there's Joseph Smith translation on verse 8. Let's look at this here. Joseph Smith changed it. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed, not to sell her unto a strange nation. He shall have no power. He shall have no power to do this, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. So basically the same thing. It's honestly, I think it's a little more awkward in the Joseph Smith translation, but I wanted to point it out that is there. But saying, now, let's finish the paragraph here. Verse 9. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. And if he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. So what does this say? This is saying, first of all, when it says sell your daughter to be a maidservant, this isn't just a slave, and this is being married. That's why he talks about being betrothed. But it's being married as a servant class. So you'd be kind of a second-class wife, the concubines. But if a man buys a wife in this way, he cannot then resell her. He either has to marry her or he has to let the family buy her back. Those are his only options. If he does marry her, or if he buys her and has her marry his son, then he has to treat her as if she was his daughter. She's no longer a slave. She is a wife of the servant or slave class, but she is a daughter to him. He cannot treat her any way else. But note the three things that he says to her. If he take another wife, so I'm talking about plural marriage here now. This was in the Bible. God says this is fine. You can do it. But you have to do that. Her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage. So what are these three things? Of course, the first two are self-explanatory. You have to feed her. You have to maintain basic living conditions. You have to clothe her. This is room and board, basically. You cannot deny her the basic amenities of life. You also have to give her the rights of marriage. This includes physical intimacy. You cannot shut her out and never see her again. You can't do this. But it also includes things such as her children inheriting land from you, because they are your children. It includes her rights as a wife in decision-making in the family, in raising the children. These kind of things are all part of the duty of marriage. So the law allows for multiple wives, but there are restrictions or there are requirements that a man has to meet in order to take plural wives. Or if he doesn't, there's either, if you do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. In other words, a concubine, a woman, a wife of the servant class, if the husband takes another wife and neglects her in any way, she is free. She's no longer married to him. There's no mention of this being adultery. She is free. She can go back to her family's house. She can remarry. She can do whatever she wants according to the law, of course, but she is free of that marriage. She is no longer bound by that marriage. If he neglects her in any way, that severs any right he has over her. She is free. But this has already taken long enough. So let us pause there, and we will try to finish the chapter out in the next video, but it is going to be a somewhat controversial chapter, so it may take 3.